Okay, well, welcome to Class 11 of Environmental Law. This week we're talking about two pretty big acts, and they're in the one chapter, and I really don't like that they don't spend a lot of time on this separate statute. So there is actually a separate PowerPoint that I posted on it. But so this one we're going to kind of talk about RCRA. Um, and RCRA is the statute that deals with waste and hazardous waste, what we call from cradle to grave. And we'll talk about that in this class. So this is, I thought this was a very little interesting quote. There's no such thing as a way, right? We all think like, oh, I put it in the garbage, it's gone. It's not gone. It goes somewhere. And kind of that's what RCRA deals with is what happens after we throw something away. Okay, so it was enacted in 1976 and was meant to minimize harm to human health and the environment by regulating handling of waste and hazardous waste. And then it was amended in 1984. So again, series of acts, it changes just like a lot of these statutes that we've looked at. Okay, so EPA is controlling hazardous waste from what we call cradle to grave, from the beginning to its creation until it is finally disposed of. Okay, so EPA is supposed to ensure the management and cleanup of solid and hazardous waste, and actually also create programs to encourage what we call source reduction, right? Reducing the creation of waste at all, and reuse of that as well. Okay, so before this, we lived in a place where there were, hazardous waste was just dumped, right? Ditches, oceans, it was burned and causing, harm to the air. It wasn't really a good scene. Um, so right from creation to disposal is what's regulated. So it regulates waste generators, so the people who make the waste, when you transport it, if you treat it, store it, or dispose of it. So all of those stages of waste. Okay, so first we have to figure out what the heck we mean by waste. So solid waste is defined in RCRA as really any discarded material that is not specifically classified as hazardous, really any waste. Now, hazardous waste is a subset of solid waste. So, solid waste is kind of, if you have my Venn diagrams, right? So you have a big thing that says solid waste, and then hazardous waste is a subset of that. Um, I don't really want to get into these. You can read this. There are waste exceptions. It's in the PowerPoint. Um, you can look through that. One of the important things to think about with solid waste, again, broad definition. Just because we call it solid waste, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily solid. So it can be liquid or gas. The key is that it is anything that is inherently waste like. So it could be liquid, it can be gas. It's really, doesn't matter. It's more about, I think this is a quiz question, so think about that. It's not like if it's not salad, that doesn't eliminate it from solid waste. It's just anything that has been discarded, right? Abandoned or discarded and is waste like, whether it is a solid, a liquid, or a gas. Now, this subset of hazardous waste, of waste, solid waste, is called hazardous waste. Okay. And then it has properties that make it dangerous or harmful to human health or the environment, which is really what RCRA really cares about. Okay. So solid waste is hazardous waste unless it's things like household waste. That's the big one. Um, there's some specific industry exceptions. Um, Oil and gas, drilling waste, arsenic, chromium. So some of these are, besides household waste, these are all kind of industry specific exceptions that are covered by other statutes. I think there's another one. Okay, so then there's two types of solid waste, right? There's subtitle D and subtitle C. Okay, so depending on if it's hazardous or non-hazardous, one of these subtitles is going to apply. So subtitle D is our non-hazardous solid waste. And usually where this ends up is in a municipal waste landfill, right? So there's an acronym for it, MSWL. So that is a landfill, right? We've seen them. Maybe if you have a home in a more rural area, you take your garbage to a landfill, right? So it accepts household waste, maybe takes some hazardous waste and some non-hazardous waste, industrial waste, construction debris, right? Um, and it is permit based to what can be qualify as a municipal solid waste landfill, and it is subject to subtitle D of RCRA. Okay, so one of the big thing about subtitle B is you can't dump solid waste open. You can't just dump your solid waste somewhere. Okay, you have to take it to a landfill, somewhere. Okay, and then subtitle D, so open banning. I can't just throw my trash, out on the road or something like that. Okay, so then the fact that I have to dispose of it, it sets criteria for these landfills. Okay, so there's minimum federal criteria for the operation. Some things might not be allowed. There might be requirements about what protections these landfills have, like lining and leachate stuff, and information about this stuff not getting into the groundwater or drinking water, all of that stuff. So there's minimum federal criteria. The a state can impose higher criteria if it wants, so that it is not subject to preemption under RCRA. And there, if there's hazardous waste, so like say you have like a refrigerator with Freon, or like we have an else like batteries or things like that, there are special requirements under these permits for those kinds of things and how to dispose of it. So I know, like, what a hassle these days, right? You can't just put your TV out on the curb anymore, right? The garbage people won't pick it up. You have to take it on special garbage pickup days. You might have to pay a fee to dispose of some of these things, because you can't just dump that in the landfill anymore. If your state does not have an approved RCRA Subtitle D program, then it's federal requirements that are going to be apply, and the EPA will do the permitting there. Some of these solid waste landfills, right? So we have our, municipal ones. That's what we think of. There are also some that are specific, like, one that deals with construction and demolition debris, maybe some industrial waste landfills. They also have what's called bioreactors that use water to speed this, like the breakdown of an organic waste. So if you wet it, then things biodegrade quicker. Some landfills, will actually try to reduce the waste, like by burning it. We've all driven by certain places on the highway where we have that methane smell, or you see the landfill with the flame, right? So they're trying to burn some of the stuff, but to reduce the volume before, to increase the capacity of the landfill. Lately, or at some point, the landfill gets full and it's in closure phase, and then they try to redevelop them. I mean, kind of out west, there's like, I golf on a golf course out in Batavia, maybe. I think it's Batavia, that is built on top of a former landfill, Settlers Hill. And you might have seen big sled hills that were formerly landfills, and then Staten Island is known. It was known as kind of like the dumping ground of New York City. Their big landfill was called Fresh Skills landfill, and they're currently in different stages, and it's turning into like a beautiful park. So that's kind of, your happy ending for a landfill, that now this area can be enjoyed recreationally. Now, so we have some of these things, right? We have this like methane gas. There's a lot of like garbage, and maybe we could make some sort of energy out of that. So some of these landfills then try to create energy from the garbage. They call that refuse derived fuel. It's like a quasi clean type energy, because you're, reducing waste, right? Reducing, but there can be issues about things that it releases, like say methane. So they incorporate these, they're called scrubbers. I don't really know the technology there when they're doing these like combustion ways of reducing of turning this into energy. So to reduce the gases, when you have the ash that results after the burning, that's tested to make sure it's safe to put back into the landfill. And then if the methane gas goes into energy. So if you don't when you have these landfills, if you don't kind of have like areas for the methane gas to be released, like they can explode. So it's obviously a very powerful force, and can be converted into energy. Talks about this in the book. So if I live in DuPage County, the government, and the government owns a landfill, they can choose whether or not they're going to limit it to DuPage residents or allow non-DuPage residents, to use it. So it's their option. That's called the market participant exception. Okay, so that's subtitle D, which we were talking about, our standard household garbage that we put out at the curb, right? And your garbage hauler takes it to a landfill. Now, this is different kind of waste, our hazardous solid wastes. And this is really where RCRA makes a big difference. Okay, so the EPA under RCRA make sure that this hazardous waste is somehow safely managed from the beginning it's created to its final disposal. We call that cradle to grave. It can be, EPA comes up with the regs, but the states usually implement them. If there is no state program, then the EPA will have to implement them. So you have generators, transporters, treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. Okay, so they people who are engaging in these activities have to be permitted. There are enforcement provisions of RCRA and provisions for corrective action in the case of a release. Okay, so how do we know what hazardous waste, what constitutes hazardous waste? There is a list. Okay, so there's a list in the CFR under RCRA, the F list, the K list, and the U and P list. Okay, so these are from like industry things, maybe not a specific industry thing for F, but like U and P are commercial chemical products. So P is very hazardous, so it's more strictly regulated than F or K, and then U is toxic, so that's like even more strictly regulated. Some companies might want to get, if they're manufacturing a certain substance or they have a byproduct of a certain substance, they might want to get that substance off of one of those EPA lists, and then they'd have to file a petition for EPA delisting. And really, we'll talk about this in a second, but what makes a substance hazardous is that they have hazardous properties. So if somehow these substances don't have hazardous properties after they're, treated by the company, then maybe it's still delisted. So if you're delisted, you have, fewer obligations under RCRA. Okay, so I have pretty pictures here. What makes waste hazardous? There are characteristics: ignitability, corrosivity, toxicity, reactivity. Okay, so I have ignitability. Does it catch fire? Okay, I guess think lighter fluid, right? It'll catch fire. Capable during handling or starting a fire or exacerbating a fire once started, right? Something that if you touch it, it might just catch on fire. And once it catches on fire, if there is an existing fire, it's going to make it worse. Okay. Corrosivity. If it, think about, something being corroded. So if you have something in a container that can corrode and they can corrode it, the waste can, there can be a release. So in our supplemental materials, there are little fun videos. I don't think I did it on ignitability because it's obvious, but on corrosivity, this one is the corrosivity. If you're a Breaking Bad fan, you'll like the little video. Reactivities. So that's something that, like, it's a highly unstable substance that if you're moving it around too much or something, and it might like explode. So that's reactivity. And toxicity. So that's stuff that is, going to be unhealthy to people if it is released. So I'm going to stop this video now. There in the supplemental materials, I have like 3 videos on toxicity, reactivity, and corrosivity that I would like you to watch now. And then we'll go on to our second video.